Oh, hey guys, this will be part 4 of my series on organized crime in north central West Virginia. I want to apologize if I appear a little bit distracted. There's a large number of trick-or-treaters outside, and Halloween's not so much a popular holiday in Germany, but it really seems to be catching on, or at least they're hitting my street up for some reason. Anyway, in this series, I introduced you to the Familia Vagabonda and explored its role within a larger bootlegging network, that is, the manufacture, distribution of moonshine and other illegal alcohol within the Mid-Atlantic region, the Upper Ohio Valley region, and how that network connected to both Chicago and New York through Baltimore. I also discussed how this Familia Vagabonda morphed into part of the Pittsburgh Mafia family, originally the Repepi faction, and then later becoming part of the Manorino faction there. And in my last video, I made reference to wheeling and a handover of power between two bosses there, Big Bill Lias and Paul No Legs Hankish. This is a good time to start talking about wheeling because it has a huge role to play in organized crime in West Virginia, a significant role to play in the national scene, and there's a definite clear series of connections between Wheeling and Clarksburg Fairmont, and that's what I'm going to talk about now. Organized crime in Wheeling, or what would later be called the Rackets, got started decades earlier than it did in Clarksburg. That is because Wheeling was a significant port on the Ohio River. In fact, it was the second largest city in Virginia at the dawn of the Civil War. And especially in the days before steamboats, the boatmen who worked on these boats would spend weeks traveling back and forth between Wheeling and New Orleans, hauling goods up and down the river. And when they get to the cities on the either end, they would want to party. And then later, you had the National Road come into town. That's where northern West Virginians get the nickname Hoopies from. You know, those Yinzers over in Pittsburgh call, especially people in the Wheeling area, Hoopies, due to the large amount of wagon wheels made in Wheeling. And the National Road ran from Wheeling all the way almost to St. Louis. And so you had millions of immigrants coming in, or settlers coming into Wheeling, buying a wagon, loading it up with goods, and crossing across the Midwest. And later, this was further amplified, enabled by the construction of the B&O Railroad between Baltimore and Wheeling. So this created a huge trade network which really focused right on Wheeling, and the railroad stimulated the construction of steel mills, engine shops, machine shops, requiring a large amount of skilled craftsmen and such that in the that was my doorbell. We have a trick-or-treater trying to get in. I ain't got nothing for him. Anyway, you know that in the year 1900, Wheeling had the highest median income of any city in the United States. This created just a golden opportunity for organized crime, especially because the government in West Virginia was already weak and corrupted by some of the coal and oil barons who would come in and pay judges, you know, to take people's land or to give them control of the natural resources. In the first video in this series, I explained how confectioner shops were often tied to bootleg operations. They would be a front business because they could mask the purchase of large amounts of sugar. In 1907, confectioner shops sprung up in Clarksburg that later had pretty close ties to the Familia Vagabonda. In 1907 in Wheeling, a confectioner shop showed up owned by two Greek brothers, the Manos brothers. Later on, they also started a gas station, and you begin to see their name more and more in connection with illegal gambling operations. Late 1910s, early 1920s, a man named Bill Lias is all over the papers in Wheeling for having, well, for one thing, he had a still in his basement that had a capacity of over 40 gallons, if I'm remembering correctly, maybe 60. It was just massive. And in the histories you read of this guy, they say that he was closely connected to the Purple Gang in Detroit and also to the Cleveland Mafia. Um, Big Bill was married twice, and he's called Big Bill because he was a huge man, both in height and in girth. He was a big dude. His first wife died. Allegedly, he had her killed for some reason. His second wife was an Alice Manos, and her brother Greg Manos was Big Bill's right-hand man. As time went on, Big Bill became more and more successful, shall we say, in gambling, and eventually he purchased Wheeling Downs. And as people would come in to visit his casinos or gamble at the horse race, his wife said, these guys would like to maybe go to have a little prostitution activity going on here. They want some company. And he was really not wanting to do that, whether that's because he didn't want extra heat brought on him, or possibly he had a distaste for prostitution. But anyway, he let his wife and his brother-in-law work, and they brought up prostitutes mainly from the Clarksburg and Fairmont areas. And he had other connections to the Fairmont areas. We're talking about bookmaking, and especially the informal lotteries. We're tied back to gambling banks on the East Coast through a connection he had in the city of Fairmont. A recent book by Bill Calabash, former U.S. Attorney for Northern West Virginia, discusses this. It was before his time, but he was aware of it. Anyway, this connection in Fairmont would front-run Bill Elias. He would know what kind of wagers Bill Elias was making and would front-run them because he was the one that had the connection back to the states and what numbers won, what horses won, etc., etc. And when Big Bill Elias found out that he was being scammed by this guy, he hired 2 Jewish assassins to travel to Fairmont and kill him. I don't know the name of this individual. It's just a reference was made to it by Bill Calabash in his book. And the third connection that Bill Elias had to Fairmont was through Senator Neely. Senator Neely was the successor to John W. Davis as kind of a Democratic political boss in Clarksburg, and as such, he was the rival of Guy Despard Goff, who was a Republican. Senator Neely established himself in the Senate, U.S. Senate, in the governor's mansion, and the Senate again, and was powerful until his death in 1958. And that's a very significant date in organized crime history of Wheeling. This Hankish fellow is Lebanese, and George Sideropoulos describes him as someone who grew up very, very poor. So poor, in fact, that he often had to wear the same clothes to school day after day, and he was mocked for this by the other students at the public high school. And perhaps that's where his just anger and ruthlessness comes from. Now, Bill Elias was seen as ruthless, and they say he would kill a man for $1. In fact, he is believed to have killed his first wife with his bare hands. However, he was also kind of beloved by the citizens of Wheeling, at least the poor ones, because he would buy them turkeys at Thanksgiving. He would buy Christmas gifts for the children. He would hand out candy to the kids on the street. He was kind of a jovial, fatherly figure to the people around him. Now, Paul Hankish would be polite to people, always perfectly polite to people, but he was not beloved by the people because he was not a generous person. He was feared. He maintained his control of the city through fear. Hankish at some point did work for Elias, maybe straight out of high school or possibly while he was still in high school. He was a runner or some sort of functionary at Wheeling Downs. Well, then he went off to Texas and bartended, and he came back and was operating as a minor bookie when the associates of Manorino Brothers found him. And as I mentioned, Manorino Brothers in New Kensington had a large layoff bank where, bookies, they get their books together and they realize, I have a lot of money riding on this one specific bet. I can't if it hits, I can't handle it. So they'll find another bookie and kind of counterbalance that. And this tends to happen at banks or exchanges run by mob bosses. The Manorino brothers would themselves have to lay off accumulation of bets, especially since a lot of their money came from the Rooney and Morrow organizations. They would lay off to Carlos Marcello in New Orleans was one of their big targets, Traficant organization in Tampa, or wherever. With with Laios on the decline, no longer owning Wheeling Downs and under the close inspection of the federal government, they need someone else, and they find that person in Paul Hankish. Laios resents this. A lot of the information we have about early Paul Hankish actually comes from Laios snitching to the FBI. And Laios also, every time Paul Hankish would move across the river and start up a bar or two and have a phone bank for his bookie operations, the phones would get cut off because Laios reported him to CMP as running a bookmake operation. He had to resort to simply using payphones for everything he did. He was constantly moving around. However, he was still growing in power, and it seems to me like they made a deal with Big Bill. We'll give you your Greek bar boot parlor. That's a form of gambling common among Greeks, and it's very lucrative at the time. He's like, you can have that game to yourself, and you can run it in this bar that you own through a straw purchase agreement with a man named Nick Miller. And in exchange, you let Paul Hankish have the other gambling in the city. And Big Bill agreed to that, but this Nick Miller guy was not okay with that. He's like, this is my bar. Yeah, you know, Big Bill backs me, but this is my income. I don't want to give it up. So Paul Hankish approaches this Miller and says, let's go talk to the Manarino brothers about this situation. Miller gets in the car, and Hankish drives him to New Kensington. Alzide and the Manarino brothers kill him in the Manarino residence. And again, this attracts a lot of attention from the FBI, but they can't ever really prove what happened there. So toward the middle of the end of 1958, there's sort of a ceasefire between Bill Laios and Paul Hankish. In 1958, Farber, who runs Hankish, is moving up to $100,000 a week in layoff bets just from the Rooney organization, North Shore, Pittsburgh. That would be something like $800,000 a week in 2025 dollars, in addition to whatever other customers they may have had. That's a huge amount of money, and Hankish was making some of it, but it's not clear he was making a lot in the beginning, especially because he was getting involved in all kinds of little stuff and personally exposing himself to danger. They were known to be breaking into mansions, breaking into country clubs, breaking into department stores and stealing things. And someone on that team was an exceptionally talented locksmith. It was probably Hankish himself, because the FBI agent who investigated Hankish for decades and finally brought him down described Hankish as having an eerie intelligence of about 135, which is near genius level. Well, this attracts the attention of the Manarino brothers, especially the younger, I believe is Gabe Manarino. Really wanted to get back at Fidel Castro because he had seized control of the San Suchi casino outside of Havana. And he'd already told them, no, I'll let you continue operating once I take power. But then he reneged. And so they knew of a vulnerability within the Canton, Ohio armory. And they recruited Hankish and others to break into this armory and to steal M1 carbines, which they were going to fly down to Cuba and give to anti-Castro rebels. The truck driver who drove the getaway truck was from the Beverly and Colton area of Randolph County in West Virginia, and his wife was from Clarksburg. I've actually pulled on that thread a little bit, and it's interesting, but it's a whole nother lengthy video or set of videos on its own. They load these, got some sort of car accident or something in front outside. They load these M1 carbines onto an airplane. It flies a short distance to Morgantown, West Virginia, where they're going to refuel. However, when they land, they're intercepted by federal agents. Now, the guy that was the project manager, their Spanish speaker, their pilot, was a close associate of the Manarino brothers, but he was also working with the CIA to overthrow Castro. And so he worked out a deal with the federal government where he would rat on all of the others and get a pardon from JFK. Totally legitimate. You can Google some of this. And he rats out some of the others, but the Manarino brothers specifically, Paul Hankish specifically, they can never quite be pinned down for these break-ins. However, he does rat them out on other break-ins. The Manarino brothers are implicated in a robbery of a bank in Toronto, Canada, and Hankish is implicated in the break-in of a grocery store, and of all places, Fairmont, West Virginia, the People's Grocery. Hankish, after he gets out of prison, is known to tell people, I was set up. While they're in the grocery, the burglar alarm goes off, and as they're running away, they're seized by Fairmont City Police, and they leave their tool behind. And the FBI takes these tools and investigates whether they were the same ones used in the break-in in Canton. They were not. The FBI also interviews the past police chief of Fairmont, West Virginia, and says, what do you know about this, Famiglia Vagabonda, this former organized crime organization, mafia-type organization in Fairmont? And the police chief says, when I was a young officer, they were big news here, but they were broken up. Everyone went to prison. They don't exist anymore. And whatever remnants of that organization still exist have no ties to the outside world. Well, that's what we're told today. That's the common belief. The fact that the FBI is asking this question kind of indicates that they didn't believe it. While Hankish is in prison for the supermarket break-in, he meets a lot of East Coast mafiosos, actual made men. Hankish as a Lebanese person was not made. Lias as a Greek person was not made. But Hankish gets to know proper mafiosos and not just the Manarino brothers. And this enables him to have a certain amount of independence later on from the Manarino brothers and to challenge them for control of certain areas, such as Uniontown in the years to come. He gets out of prison around fall of 1963, and almost immediately the FBI, through their network of informants, is warned that an upcoming mob war is about to break out in Wheeling between Hankish and Lias, because Hankish is making big moves and stepping all over Big Bill's network of crooks and criminal enterprises. It's not entirely clear to me how much power Big Bill still had at this time. Just a few anecdotes, like for example, I talked about this Butch Florio fellow who was a bar boot dealer for Bill Lias in 1957-58, FBI reports. In the early 60s, he's reported as working for Paul Hankish. The ground was shifting under Big Bill, and he was feeling very vulnerable. And the thing that really was a line too far was Hankish broke the deal. Hankish ignored the peace agreement that he had with Big Bill and started his own bar root game just a few blocks away from Big Bill's one remaining bar. And so Big Bill talks to his network of associates in the Cleveland Mafia, and with a person, a DiBartolo out of the Cleveland, Canton areas. Who, that family, a large construction family, also founded the San Francisco 49ers. They, along with Meyer Lansky and some others, said, yeah, okay, go ahead and kill this guy. And so Hankish goes out to his car one day and he starts it up and it explodes. However, Hankish is not killed. He survives. He's just crippled. He loses most of his legs and has to use, either crutches or a wheelchair the rest of his life. He's later given the name No Legs Paul Hankish, but the fact that he survives this blast gives him a certain aura of invincibility and makes him a legend among other mafia figures outside the Pittsburgh area, up and down the East Coast. Now, as Paul's in pain in his car, he's screaming out and he's blaming Bill Lias. And he's in the hospital. He's delirious with pain. He tells people he was killed by Bill Lias. but of course he doesn't die. And once he's sedated and he begins to recover, he shuts his mouth. And it appears that some sort of deal was made. He met with some people, and they told him, just be quiet. If you come out of this alive, you'll come out on top, because it was an unsanctioned hit. What that means is that although Big Bill cleared it with his friends in Cleveland, it wasn't cleared by the 5 families. And Paul Hankish was under protection of the 5 families, because he was on record with the Manarinos or the Gambinos back in New York. He wasn't supposed to be executed in this fashion by another mafia family without the approval and the clearance of the 5 families. And so Big Bill continues on a little bit of time, but he's pretty much down to 1 bar. And it's a pretty posh setup, and it's highly secured. He's got electronic locks that will seal lock, magnetically lock closed, can't be forced open, and can only be released by a button inside of the bar. Well, West Virginia State Policeman infiltrates the bar undercover, seizes control of the button, fights off attempts to retake control of the button, holds it open long enough for a task force raid team from West Virginia State Police to come in and arrest everybody. That undercover police officer's name is Joe Trupo. You know him. He was former sheriff of Harrison County, among other things, a mythical figure, epic figure, and among the West Virginia State Police, and that's just part of his mythology. Big Bill pretty much gives up at that point. He moves to Miami Beach with his wife, and when the FBI asks him, he says, I don't know if I'm going to come back to Wheeling or not. And he never does. He dies 1968 as a fat, old, obese man in poor health, pretty much given up on life. Paul Hankish, on the other hand, consolidates his control of Wheeling, spreads out across West Virginia, has ties up into the Youngstown area, Uniontown, Pennsylvania, and has connections all up and down the East Coast. And even shows up later with AC, selling cocaine to AC, O.J. Simpson's friend. I mean, he really becomes kind of an epic figure, and he continues to figure into Clarksburg mob history. Now, one interesting thing before I close this video down is one of the people who was believed to have coordinated the bombing of Paul Hankish was this old guy, Giuseppe Joseph Pendilli, who's living in Argentina, but somehow pulls this off, or at least has a role to play in it. And that was kind of the last straw for him and his support among the Pittsburgh Mafia. Not that it mattered, as he was like extremely old at that point, but he had been trying to get repatriated, and they just were not having it. Have a good evening. I'll holler at you later.